Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at a column from page number 6 of the daily edition. In this column, the writers evaluate the provisions of the Social Security Code of 2020, which was enacted by the Parliament last year, and they make a case for universalization of Social Security. So first let's understand, what do you mean by Social Security? See, Social Security is nothing but the collective medical and old age benefits that are provided to workers by the employers and the government in the form of provident fund, insurance, pension, maternity benefit, gratuity, etc. Such financial support in the form of medical benefits and old age benefits constitutes social security for the workers, which guarantees social well being for them in return for the contribution that they would have made for the economy. So, workers would be eligible for these social security benefits while working and as well as post retirement. Some benefits, such as medical insurance, gratuity, etc., would be available during their working years, whereas few benefits, such as old age pension, shall be available post retirement. Providing this social security is the responsibility of the government and as well as the employer, and the Social Security Code dictates the terms of this social security that has to be guaranteed by the employers. Until last year, we had 8 different central laws that dealt with social security, such as maternity benefit, employee state insurance, employee provident fund, old age pension, gratuity benefits, etc. But now, these 8 existing central laws have been merged into one single law, that is the Social Security Code of 2020. One of the key drawbacks of the 2020 code is that it keeps out most of the informal workers from its ambit, who constitute 91% of the country's workforce, and hence the writers make a case for the universalization of social security. Out of these 8 existing central laws that dealt with employee provident fund, employee state insurance, maternity benefit, and gratuity benefit, they were entirely meant for organized workers. Even under the new law, this hasn't changed, and these benefits that I just mentioned is available only to workers from the organized sectors. Basic social security benefits such as PF, employee state insurance, maternity benefit, and gratuity is not available to informal workers. So, as a result, a large number of workers from the unorganized sector get left out, thereby defeating the very purpose of the Social Security Code. The law, however, mandates the central and the state governments to come out with their own specific schemes for the unorganized workers in order to extend some of these benefits to them. But, however, there is still a lot of ambiguity and overlap in the responsibility and jurisdiction of the central and the state governments while providing these benefits to informal workers. While the code does provide for few benefits to informal workers, and while it mandates the center and the state to come out with special schemes for unorganized workers, it makes these schemes inaccessible to the unorganized workers because it mandates online registration of the beneficiaries. But most of the workers in the unorganized sector, they lack digital literacy, and this digital divide in the country and the lack of connectivity, that is digital connectivity, might keep unorganized workers away from these benefits because mandatory registration on an online portal may not be feasible and possible for all the unorganized workers. A majority of the workforce in the unorganized sector happen to be illiterates or at least digital illiterates, and they may not have access to digital devices and internet connectivity. While the center has been mandated to develop an online portal for registration, such a mandatory requirement for registration becomes a hurdle from accessing these services, and hence a large part of the workforce could get left out from the benefits of these schemes. See, for example, back in 2008 itself, many state governments had brought out their own version of Unorganized Workers Social Security Act. But even though it has been 13 years since these laws were enacted, a large number of informal workers are still outside the ambit of these acts because there are several hurdles and entry barriers which prevents the workforce from the unorganized sector from accessing these schemes. The basic challenge is that most of the workforce in the unorganized sector, they lack awareness about these schemes, And when the workers are not even aware of the scheme, and when they're not able to grasp the details of these schemes, if the government is insisting on their mandatory registration and furnishing of documents, then it becomes an entry barrier which acts as a hurdle that prevents many unorganized workers from accessing the benefits of these schemes. Then, moreover, since most of the informal workers migrate from state to state, it requires a high degree of interstate coordination and cooperation to provide the benefits of these schemes, and this shall require the creation of a basic framework and a structure by the central government. But the Social Security Code of 2020 doesn't address these requirements, and this places the informal workers at the risk of getting caught in the conflict between center and states, and any tussle or conflict between the states could end up derailing these programs. Then upon this, the social security benefits that are provided under the code comes with a lot of restrictions, especially the restriction of threshold on the number of employees based on which the benefits become applicable to certain companies. For example, the maternity benefit is not universal even under the new code, and it is applicable to only those organizations which employ more than 10 workers. So clearly, many informal industries and unorganized units and their workers get left out as a result of this arbitrary threshold that is placed by the law. In fact, this was one of the problems that existed in the previous central laws, and a new uniform code was supposed to iron out all these problems, and it was supposed to reduce such entry barriers in order to make the schemes and the benefits more universal so that the informal workers could access them. On similar lines, the benefits of EPF is applicable only to those workers who are employed in organizations that have more than 20 workers on their payroll. Gratuity benefits are available only in those organizations which employ more than 10 workers. So as you can see, many small businesses and companies, especially in the unorganized sector, will get left out. And since a majority of our economy is comprised of such unorganized units, a large part of the country's workforce, that is the informal workforce, will get left out from these social security benefits. So as a result, the entire benefits of social security measures will be cornered by just a few people who work in the organized sector, thereby further increasing the divide between organized workers and informal workers. The writers point out that at a time when India is chairing a BRICS meeting ahead of its ongoing preparation for a BRICS summit, the member countries are going to debate on labor issues, including social security, and this should push India to consider the universalization of social security. These entry barriers and hurdles will have to be removed, and the schemes will have to be universalized so that 91% of the workforce, that is the informal workforce, can be covered. And this remains one of the unfulfilled aspirations of the new Social Security Code. The government, especially the center, needs to remember that India's population is going to age very soon as the demographic dividend starts falling in another 15 years. And as the population ages, the requirements of basic healthcare, pension, and insurance becomes all the more important to an aging population. And especially now, considering how the economy has been disrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic and how the healthcare system has been thrown into a spin, it's very important for the government to consider scaling up social security benefits and making them universal. Because despite the pandemic, we continue to have a very poor healthcare budget, and our government is still spending hardly 1% of the country's GDP on public health. Even the budget that has been allocated for vaccines has not been entirely utilized. And if you exclude the COVID-19 vaccine budget, then you will notice that hardly any higher allocation has been made for public health care, despite the country being ripped apart by the pandemic. So the pandemic-induced economic distress is going to have a severe impact on informal workers and migrant workers, and their loss of livelihood and loss of income and jobs is going to directly affect their social well-being, and hence it becomes all the more important for the government to universalize social security. Now let's take up a column from page number 7 in which the writers evaluate the future for India-Pakistan with regard to their trading relationship. See, since independence, even though the overall trading volume between India and Pakistan has remained low, the trading relationship has consistently grown over the years. despite repeated setbacks as a result of tensions in their relationship. For example, currently, the India Pakistan trading relationship has almost come to a standstill due to a few adverse developments that took place in 2019. First, we had the Pulwama terror attack carried out by Jaish-e-Mohammed, which was a Pakistan based terror outfit, and India rightly held Pakistan responsible for sponsoring such organizations to carry out acts of terrorism against India. Following this terror attack against a CRPF convoy, India initiated coercive diplomacy against Pakistan, and it undertook a series of restrictive trade measures in order to cut and scale down the trading relations with Pakistan and in order to impose an economic cost on Pakistan. So, accordingly, India withdrew the MFN tag that it had given as per the norms of the WTO. But please note that Pakistan had never given the MFN tag to India. MFN stands for Most Favored Nation tag, and under the WTO, all the members are supposed to give each other the MFN tag, which means that they will not discriminate against a particular country and they will give them the same treatment as they would give to the most favored nation in their trading relationship. So, extending the MFN tag under the WTO prevents countries from resorting to restrictive trade practices, such as higher duties, taxes, and tariffs, which acts as a trade barrier. As per the WTO norms, India had extended the most favored nation tag to Pakistan, but Pakistan had never given this tag to India. But following the Pulwama terror attacks, India was enraged and India decided to withdraw the MFN tag in order to discriminate against Pakistan in its trading relations. Then immediately, India hiked customs duties and import duties by a massive 200% against Pakistan in order to cut off Pakistani exports into India. So while India took these restrictive trade measures following the Pulwama attacks, a few months later, Pakistan entirely suspended trade with India. It banned both exports and imports, following India's decision to revoke Article 370, which had provided special status to Jammu and Kashmir, and following India's decision to reorganize the state of J&K into two union territories. Pakistan alleged that India had changed the status quo of the conflict, and as a retaliation, it suspended all trade with India, including a ban on both exports and imports. So this led to the emergence of a hostile trading relationship. But recently there was a glimmer of hope when Pakistan's Economic Coordination Committee had approved the proposal to import few essential items from India, such as sugar, cotton, and yarn. Because these items are critical to Pakistan's economy, especially cotton and yarn are needed for its textile industry, and Pakistan has been facing a shortage, and as a result the prices of these essential items have shot up, and hence the Economic Coordination Committee of Pakistan had approved the importing of these essential items from India. But however, this import was abruptly cancelled by the Pakistani government by citing that trade with India cannot be allowed unless and until India revokes these decisions related to Jammu and Kashmir. But even though Pakistan cancelled this proposal, this development does give rise to some hope because over the last few months, the bilateral relations between India and Pakistan have definitely shown some improvement, and this might rub off on the trading relations between the two countries as well. So the writers are of the opinion that there is a possibility of reviving trade dialogue between the two countries in the coming months, and it's very much possible for these trade curbs and restrictions to be reversed because there are plenty of precedents that suggest that a normalization is most likely to happen in the coming months. See, back in the 1960s, following the 1965 war, India-Pakistan had completely suspended the trading relationship, and for almost 9 years, there was hardly any trade between the two countries. But following this gap, trade was resumed between the two countries with the signing of the 1974 Protocol, which allowed the two countries to trade in few essential agricultural commodities, which was critical for their food security. This essentially highlighted the dependency of India and Pakistan on each other's markets, because for several Indian producers and Indian traders, Pakistan is a key market, and at the same time, India does depend on Pakistan for few essential items. On the other hand, Pakistan has an even higher dependency on India for many essential items, and for a number of Pakistani products, India happens to be a lucrative market. So with this realization, the 1974 protocol was worked out, which allowed for the resumption of trade in few select essential agricultural commodities, and both the countries created a positive list, and in these items and commodities which were listed, trade was allowed, and over the years, gradually the positive list was expanded, thereby leading to the strengthening of the trading relationship. Even though the overall trading volumes were low, trading relations between the two countries gradually improved over the years, and even after every disruption following a war or a conflict or a terror attack, eventually trade relations would be restored because trade between the two countries is also critical for several local villages in the border areas. And as discussed, both the countries do have a dependency on each other. So there is some hope that Pakistan did consider importing sugar, cotton, and yarn from India at a time of crisis. And even though the Pakistani government cancelled this proposal, it has recently exempted the import of essential medical items and medicine related raw materials in order to ensure the availability of drugs in Pakistan. This shows that both India and Pakistan indirectly acknowledge the dependency on each other, and hence it's very important to analyze the trading relationship by looking at the trade data because it helps in establishing the trend in the India Pakistan trading relationship following these latest restrictions. See, after the Pulwama attack, India increased import duty and customs duty by 200%, but however, India never banned any exports to Pakistan. Through third countries, export of few essential items was allowed by India, and some essential goods and commodities have been exported to Pakistan over the last 2 years. But Pakistan, on the other hand, had placed a complete ban on all imports and exports from India. But however, it did make a recent exemption for few essential medical items and raw materials. So considering that Pakistan had more or less banned all trade with India, it is better we look at Indian trade data to establish the trend, because despite these trading restrictions and the withdrawal of the MFN tag, India still allowed exports as there was no ban on exports to Pakistan. So this trade data from India shows that since the ban, that is since the last 1.5 to 2 years, despite these trading restrictions and prohibitions, $280 million worth of goods and commodities have been traded between India and Pakistan. But before these restrictions, for the financial year 2018-19, the trading volume stood at $2.56 billion. But as a result of these tensions and curbs, the trading volume had fallen drastically. But the important point to note is that despite the ban and the restrictions, still $280 million worth of goods and commodities were traded between the two countries. This was done either through third countries, wherein India accounted for exports worth around $278 million into Pakistan, and the main exports were vaccines, pharmaceutical products and raw materials, and sugar. Despite the ban in Pakistan, $2 million worth of commodities were exported into India, including the export of dates, ethyl alcohol, etc. Most of this trade has either happened through third countries or through illegal channels and informal channels. And despite this low trading volume, this trading data provides hope for the India-Pakistan trading relationship as both the countries have an interdependency on each other. For India, Pakistan is a key market for several essential products and items, and even India gets to import several essential commodities from Pakistan. Plus, trade at the border areas, especially at the local villages, is critical for the local economies. And considering all these ground realities, it is simply unviable for the two countries to remain non-cooperative in their trading relationship. With the ongoing improvement in the bilateral relations, it's only a matter of time before the existing trade restrictions are lifted, because otherwise, any further continuance of these trade curbs and restrictions will simply increase informal trade and smuggling, which is not in the interests of both the countries. Hence, the writers point out that India-Pakistan should start working towards a normalization of their trading relationship by slowly lifting these restrictions and by creating a positive list of items which can be traded between the two countries. Such a slow initial start will set the stage for a further trade dialogue, and similar to past agreements and protocols, both the countries can work out a list of essential items that they can trade with each other, thereby leading the revival of their trading relationship. Now, it's very important to note that in geopolitics, a large trading volume acts as a natural buffer against conflicts, tensions, and wars. And hence, if India and Pakistan are looking to scale down tensions and prevent future conflicts between them, one of the best ways to do that is by significantly increasing trade between them, because a large trading volume acts as a natural leverage and as a buffer against any tensions and escalations. Now let's look at this article from page number 8. According to this article, state broadcaster Doordarshan is planning to launch its international channel known as DD International in order to project and present India's point of view to the global community. This decision of the government of India and Doordarshan comes in the backdrop of the massive criticism that the Indian government has faced, particularly from Western media, with regard to its poor handling of the pandemic. The government of India believes that the one-sided reporting of the Western media is not providing space for India's point of view, that is the government's point of view. And hence, in order to directly reach out to the global audience, the government has decided to establish DD International that could project the government's viewpoint and shape the global narrative, as currently the government of India is not able to challenge or even counter the international criticism that it has faced from Western media outlets. See, as of now, Doordarshan and its existing channels have a very limited global reach. Currently, DD's channels are broadcast in few other countries through bilateral arrangements where local broadcasters distribute DD's channels. But this reach is very limited, and hence a separate and a new DD International channel is likely to be launched, which can supplement the live streaming service that has been launched by Prasar Bharati on its global digital platform. The government of India is planning to set up DD International on the lines of BBC, particularly BBC World, which projects Britain's viewpoint to the rest of the world. Now let's look at this article from page number 9. According to this article, the government of India has raised subsidy on DAP fertilizers, which stands for diammonium phosphate. See, diammonium phosphate or DAP is a crucial fertilizer and a very popular fertilizer that is used for all varieties of crops in order to provide crucial nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus. It is essentially a phosphatic fertilizer that aids plant productivity, but the prices of this fertilizer was going up as a result of rise in international prices of raw materials such as ammonia and phosphoric acid, which happen to be the key ingredients used in the manufacturing of DAP. IFFCO happens to be India's largest fertilizer producer, and it had announced a significant price hike for DAP fertilizers, citing international price rise for raw materials. But this hike in prices would have burdened the farmers, and hence the center has decided to step in and enhance fertilizer subsidy for DAP fertilizers. And as a result of this decision, the current government subsidy, which stood at 500 rupees per bag, will go up to 1,200 rupees per bag, thus raising India's annual fertilizer subsidy bill, which currently stands at around 80,000 crore rupees, by another 14,700 crore rupees. Now let's look at this article from page number 13. According to this article, the United States has most likely decided to waive off sanctions that were imposed against the Nord Stream 2 project of Russia. See, the Nord Stream project is a gas pipeline project that runs under the Baltic Sea, and it transports natural gas from Russia to Germany. In 2011, the first pipeline known as Nord Stream was set up and inaugurated, and it was made operational. This pipeline happens to be the world's longest subsea pipeline. Now, a second pipeline is being built by Russia to connect with Germany, that is Nord Stream 2. And this project had run into a controversy as it has been opposed by the United States and as well as by several European countries, especially in Central Europe and Eastern Europe. These European countries have been worried that the Nord Stream pipelines will increase Russian influence in Europe, thereby undermining their influence. East European countries like Ukraine are particularly worried because currently the pipelines that transport fossil fuels from Russia to Europe, they run through Ukraine, and Ukraine earns a lot of transit fees, which is a crucial source of revenue for the Ukrainian government. But through the Nord Stream project, Russia will be bypassing all these countries and directly connect with Germany and West Europe, thereby further increasing its influence in Europe. So the United States is obviously opposed to this. And the US also has an economic reason to oppose this project because the US was looking to export its own shale gas to European nations. So, motivated by these geopolitical and economic considerations, the US had imposed sanctions against the Nord Stream project as a part of the CATSA sanctions against Russia. CATSA stands for Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act. This law declares Russia as an adversary state of the United States and it allows the US to place economic sanctions against Russian projects. But despite these sanctions, Russia and Germany had gone ahead with the project and Nord Stream 2 pipeline is nearing completion. And now with the slight improvement in the relations between US and Russia, the US government has shown interest to waive off these sanctions. But the lifting of these sanctions has caused concern in Ukraine as it will deprive Ukraine of its transit fees, which could potentially undermine its struggle against Russian aggression and intervention in its internal affairs. Next, we have another article on page number 13, which makes a reference to civil nuclear cooperation between Russia and China. See, Russia has been helping China to build civil nuclear reactors at two important locations, and this key point can be important for prelims and as well as for mains. According to this article, Russian President Vladimir Putin and Chinese President Xi Jinping, they have launched work on these nuclear power plants, which happens to be a joint project between Russia and China. This map over here depicts the nuclear power plants in China, and Russia is helping China in the construction of the Tianwan nuclear power plant located over here along China's east coast. And it is also assisting China in the construction of the Zudabao nuclear power plant located over here. Next, we have one more important article on page number 13. According to this article, China has protested against the passage of a US naval ship via the Taiwan Strait. Just a few days back, a US naval ship carried out a transit through the contested Taiwan Strait, and the US Navy 7th Fleet, consisting of a missile destroyer and other ships, have passed through the Taiwan Strait, thereby demonstrating their commitment to uphold freedom of navigation in the Indo-Pacific. Under its Indo-Pacific strategy, the US has been committed to upholding free movement in the Indo-Pacific, and it has been working with other like-minded countries like Japan, Australia, and India to keep the Indo-Pacific open. But as China claims sovereignty over Taiwan, there are constant military tensions over here in the Taiwan Strait, and in these contested waters, the US Navy has carried out a passage without China's permission, and this is a part of the ongoing standoff between US and China, where the US is seen to be supporting Taiwan and as well as several other Southeast Asian countries in exercising their maritime claims against the expansionist aggressive behavior of China. So following this passage of US naval ships, China has objected to this and it has called it a grave provocation by the US armed forces. Whereas the United States has defended its right to fly, sail and operate anywhere where international laws permit, which is essentially a reference to the freedom of navigation and overflight, which is guaranteed under the UN clause or the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. Now let's take up a couple of mains practice questions. The first question, the universalization of social security remains an unfulfilled aspiration in the new Code on Social Security. Examine the statement. The second question, is a thaw in the India-Pakistan trade relations possible in the current context? Discuss. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. So this concludes our discussion for today. Thanks for watching.